Mr. Floyd, why have you not permitted Negroes to bowl at your bowling alley here in Orangeburg?
Because I have my own customers that patronize me 52 weeks a year. They support me year in and year out. I need no other business.
The tension kept growing. I mean, you could just feel it in the atmosphere.
I don't think there was any malice in their hearts to go out there and deliberately kill people that night.
What occurred last night is of great concern to us. It's one of the saddest days in the history of South Carolina. The years of work and understanding have been shattered by this unfortunate incident at Orangeburg.
Every black person in South Carolina was impacted by the Orangeburg Massacre.
The only other time I had that feeling was when Martin Luther King was killed.
I was the Columbia Bureau Chief for the Charlotte Observer, and I had become the South Carolina stringer or non-staff correspondent for the New York Times and the Washington Post as well. You could feel tension steadily building. I could just feel it building.
They called a curfew 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We went across the Holiday Inn on Highway 601 in Orangeburg at 4 o'clock, and it's a weird feeling. I maintain the pigeons wasn't even flying. It's just everything was real still.
I have considered it necessary to declare that a state of emergency exists in Orangeburg.
The only other time I had that feeling was when Martin Luther King was killed. It's a weird feeling. I said, I hope I never go through that again.
So on Thursday night, students were very frustrated and angry, and some began shouting at cars passing in front of the campus on Highway 601, and began throwing some stones, and highway patrolmen were there. The patrol moved up toward the edge of the campus, and as they did, students retreated.
I remember listening to patrol radio that night. I heard a signal 33, which meant nobody transmit. I said, oh, something's happened. Nobody knew what was going to evolve. And I really didn't know at the time what the whole story was.
And then somebody in the highway patrol, to my recollection, said, fire. But it was more like a question. The inflection on it was more like a question than an order.
The sky lit up like it was lightning flash when the shooting began. The shooting itself took 8 to 10 seconds.
And then there was a single shot, and then right after that, a volley of everything. Everybody started firing off toward the campus.
It sounded like an eternity to me. It sounded like it started and it just didn't stop and wouldn't stop. You couldn't do anything to make it stop.
And this was 8 seconds in which 9 highway patrolmen were firing buckshot with shotguns, some shooting multiple times, each shell containing 8 to 10 pellets, each the size of a .32 caliber pistol. And one, I think it was a city policeman, fired his service revolver 6 times.
And they all started firing, and as immediately as they finished firing one volley, an officer was screaming at them, cease fire, cease fire, I didn't order you to fire, cease fire. And as he finished his statement, you heard the moans and groans and crying from the campus.
And students, as soon as the shooting began, of course, turned to run, or dived for the ground. So some were shot in the bottom of the feet. Most of all but 2 or 3 were shot from either the side or the rear.
Some of the highway patrol were very grievous about what they had just done and not realize they had done it. Others were, well, it served them right attitude.
I went to the hospital in Orangeburg, which was about 3 miles from the campus. And when I got there, it was just packed with people.
At that time, the hospital was divided into a white hospital and a small black clinic with 2 or 3 beds in it. And the wounded are being brought over to the hospital, and the white staff wouldn't lift a finger to help. Something about the hypocritic oath didn't quite cross the color line at that time. I understand later on, as they were overwhelmed with casualties, they got some help from the white side of the hospital.
And someone told me that Cleveland Sellers had been there and had been shot.
And after I'd been sitting in for a while, a deputy came in, a black deputy, who pointed me out. And I saw it in his eyes when he looked at me. I knew he knew who I was. And he told the sheriff, and then the sheriff came in and said, "Are you Cleveland Sellers?" And the goose was cooked at that point, so I said yes. And they took me in immediately, and they patched me up, and then they said, "We're gonna take you downtown."
Cleveland Sellers was over there sort of like sitting literally in the witness chair, sort of holding his arm.
I had a deputy there sitting with me who said that you're not supposed to communicate with anybody.
And so I saw Sellers and asked him how he was feeling, and he just gave me a thumbs down and holding his shoulder. He'd been shot just top of his arm, just under the shoulder. He was placed in a highway patrol car, and they headed about 90 miles an hour on the interstate to Columbia, and he was taken to the then Central Correctional Institution, which no longer exists, but that was the downtown prison in Columbia.
When I asked, I was informed that I was in the cell block that housed the death row inmates, and I said, well, this is adding insult to injury.
Governor McNair really had information that was a fair amount of which was inaccurate that he presented to the public.
It has become apparent that the incident last night was sparked by black power advocates who represent only a small minority of the total student bodies of South Carolina State College and Claflin College.
I don't think it was deliberately inaccurate. I think he didn't fully understand himself exactly what had happened. But he blamed it. The blame was placed on Cleveland Sellers.
Governor McNair was trying to make a message. He was trying to send a tough on law and order, and we're not going to have that in the South. They can do that in Los Angeles, and they can do that in Philadelphia, and they can do that in Harlem and all those places. But here, I'm going to draw the line in the sand. What
actually started the shooting, I learned much, much, much later. But I learned it from the Deputy Attorney General who I knew, who had actually later defended the highway patrolman in a federal trial. He said he heard we were writing a book. And in those days I was covering the legislature, and it was in January after we'd written the book and drafted it at least. He said, "Do you know what actually started the shooting?" And I said, "We have a theory." He said, "What's your theory?" And I said, "Our theory is that one of the patrolmen fired what he has intended as warning shots in the air, and the others started shooting." He looked up at me and he said, "You're the first person I've heard even suggest that theory, except for the patrolman who told me he fired the warning shots." I did cover the trial of the highway patrolman, and Jack Nelson covered the trial of the highway patrolman. It was in federal court. The judge was Chief District Judge in South Carolina, J. Robert Martin, who was a very strong judge, a tough judge, a fair-minded judge. And he once told the state's top civil rights lawyer, told Matthew Perry, he said, "You know, Perry," he said, "I actually believe in segregation." He said, "But I believe in the law first."
The FBI has investigated. The FBI has made its report to the Justice Department, and quite obviously it made no recommendations that any found no wrongdoing on the part of anybody.
Did we break racism and inequality and all those things completely? No, we didn't. But we sure gave it a good swing at it.
Until we can turn and look back behind us and say, damn, what damage we have caused. How can we be kinder and gentler and non-prejudiced in the future? It's not going to change.
Have a full investigation, report, and some form of restitution for the people who were injured.
And provide some kind of compensation for the families of those who were killed and for those who were injured.
This would be a way, I think, to really gain further reconciliation in the state and heal that wound, not heal that scar that Governor McNair talked about. And I think today it could hardly be more timely than it is right now.